speak to that. Yes.
Welcome to Iran.
Sure.
Iranian top nuclear negotiator in an interview with us in Al Jazeera, he said that U.S. must accept reality and lift sanction immediately, and that Iran is entitled to further advance its nuclear program, citing Article 26 and 36 of the Iran deal. Do you have a comment on that?
I don't have a specific comment to that, and that's precisely because the issue of sanctions and the issue of nuclear steps and nuclear restrictions, that's at the crux of what it is that the 6 rounds that have been concluded of indirect negotiations with Tehran and Vienna have been all about. It's also why we have very consistently called for the resumption of diplomacy, indirect diplomacy in the case of the United States, so that we can determine whether we can finalize the remaining issues. We can build upon the progress that had been achieved in those 6 rounds on the question of, on the one hand, the nuclear steps that Iran must take to resume its compliance with the JCPOA, and on the other hand, the steps regarding sanctions that the United States and the international community would be willing to take should Iran be willing to resume its compliance with the JCPOA. So we'll leave that to the negotiations in Vienna.
There's some reports in the New York Times that Biden administration is trying to give incentive to Iran by easing some sanctions to encourage them to negotiate faithfully in Vienna. Is this true?
We have been very clear all around that we are not willing and will not take unilateral steps as sweeteners to sweeten the pot just to get negotiations going. A mutual return to compliance, it is in the interests of the United States, it is in the interests of the other members of the P5+1, it is also, as previous governments in Iran have concluded, in the interests of Tehran, if we are able to get there. So we will we will be clear that we're not going to engage in unilateral steps for the sake of just getting back to the table.
Also, the New York Times reported that U.S. officials have warned Israel that its attacks against the Iranian nuclear program are counterproductive and have enabled Tehran to rebuild an even more efficient enrichment system. Could you elaborate on this? I mean, have you been in touch with Israel on this issue and trying to persuade them not to attack?
Well, what I will say broadly is that we have been in regular, almost constant contact with our Israeli partners to include on this issue. Special Envoy Malley was just in Israel last week, I believe it was. He had an excellent visit there where he engaged in consultations with Israeli government counterparts and also with senior intelligence officials as we prepare to resume negotiations in Vienna. What he was doing there is not unique, however. We have regularly engaged with our Israeli partners before each round, in many cases during each round, and after each of the 6 rounds of negotiations that have been completed. Look, at the end of the day, the United States and Israel, we share a common objective here, and that is to see to it that Iran is verifiably and permanently prevented from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And we continue to believe that diplomacy, in coordination with our allies and partners, and that of course includes Israel, is the best path to achieve that goal. It's the best path because it sets us out on an approach that is verifiable and that is sustainable and that is permanent. And that is one of the key advantages that the JCPOA conveys. So we will continue to consult very closely with our allies and partners. Special Envoy Malley in recent days alone has had discussions with his Chinese, his Russian counterpart as well. We have been in close contact with the E3. He had an engagement with the E3 members on his travel. He engaged with our GCC partners on the travel, during that travel as well. And in all of those engagements, there was a broad and shared agreement that on the need for a mutual return to full compliance with the JCPOA.
So do you expect the talks to go on without a hitch next Monday, a week from today, on the 29th?
I certainly don't want to be in the business of predicting how this will unfold.
You don't see them being scuttled for any reason?
As of right now, talks are still slated to resume next Monday, November 29th.
of Iran, given the steps it's taken outside of the nuclear deal?
Well, we have been very clear that Iran's provocative nuclear steps are of great concern to us. They are of great concern to our partners as well. We have made very clear that these continued nuclear escalations are unconstructive and they are at their core inconsistent with the stated goal, with Iran's stated goal of returning to mutual compliance with the JCPOA. We've also been very clear that they serve no constructive end. They will not provide Iran with any negotiating leverage when talks resume in Vienna next week. Look, we've noted with concern statements from Iran, statements to the effect of only countries with nuclear weapons have taken such steps with respect to enrichment. The JCPOA, one of, again, its core advantages, was the fact for us that it imposed strict limits, both on the level and the quantity of enrichment of enriched uranium in Iran. And Iran's continued escalations, its continued escalations beyond JCPOA limits, they're a clear reminder for us, for our partners as well, of the importance of it, seeing to it, or at least testing the proposition, that we can achieve a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA.
But they haven't faced any repercussions for the repeated steps that you've, again, criticized. At what point are you willing to censure them for what they have done and make them pay a price for it?
Well, we have been very clear for a number of reasons, including for these continued nuclear escalations, that this approach to the JCPOA, what we are trying to test out in Vienna, is not an approach that we will take indefinitely. It is not an approach that we can or should take indefinitely, because eventually Iran's continued nuclear advances will render the advantage, the utility of returning to the JCPOA as it was crafted and ultimately implemented in 2016 as not worth it. Not worth it for the United States, not worth it for our international partners as well. We're not at that point yet. We continue to believe that diplomacy provides the most sustainable, the most durable, and really the only permanent and verifiable means of seeing to it that Iran can never again obtain a nuclear weapon. And so that's why we are returning to Vienna to see to it if we can achieve that mutual return to compliance.
But short of that point, like, why not censure them now for the steps that they have already taken? As you said, for a program that otherwise would not need to take the steps, 60% enrichment, uranium metal enriched. Why not censure them?
Well, you referred to it. There is a Board of Governors meeting in the coming days. I don't want to get ahead of that meeting. We have full faith and confidence in the Director General, Mr. Amano. We have full faith and confidence in the IAEA itself. We've been consulting very closely with the IAEA. The Director General had an opportunity to meet with Secretary Blinken here at the department several weeks ago, but we have been in regular contact with the IAEA to determine the best approach and the best response to these continued nuclear escalations.